They told me boarding school would make me stronger. They didn't tell me about the laws, the rivalries, or the price of simply being there. One night, laughter turned to blood, and by morning, everything I knew was gone. This is my story. Subscribe now, because what happened next, no one saw coming. The suitcase was heavier than it looked. The handle hurt my hands as I pulled it across the broken floor of the hostel hallway. The wheels made squeaking sounds and sometimes got stuck in the broken tiles. I had to pull hard to get it free. My uniform stuck to my back with sweat, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I would block the path. And blocking the path meant making a senior angry. In boarding school, making a senior angry was like painting a target on your forehead. Move that thing, a sharp voice called out. I froze. An SS3 girl with long braids tied in blue ribbons stood at the other end. She was tall and scary, but it was the way she looked at me like I was a bug in her way that made my stomach twist. Sorry, senior, I said quickly, pulling the suitcase to the side and pressing myself against the wall. She didn't answer. She just laughed, in a mean way, before walking past me. Her perfume smelled like powder and cheap body spray. Her friends walked behind her, giggling at some private joke. Their laughter bounced off the walls and followed me, like a reminder. You don't belong here. Not yet. Inside the junior hostel, everything was loud and messy. The air smelled like kerosene stoves, dust, and the sweet smell of biscuits hidden in lockers. Bunk beds scraped against the floor as girls fought for space. Buckets clattered. Voices went up and down, some laughing, some already crying. I found my bed, a top bunk, in the middle row. The wall next to it had old writing names scratched in ink, carved initials, little hearts. Chica was here, 2004. SS2 Queens forever. I dropped the suitcase by the bed, with a sigh. My hands hurt, my legs ached, and for a second, I let myself breathe. Just 1 second. But peace didn't last in a place like this. You there? The voice was sharp and commanding. I turned quickly. An SS2 girl stood by the doorway. She wasn't as scary as the SS3 girl I'd seen earlier, but she acted like the world had to bow to her. Yes, senior? I said quietly. Without another word, she threw a plastic bucket across the floor. It rolled and bumped against my suitcase with a hollow sound. Go get water for me, from the water tank, and don't waste my time. I stared at the bucket. My hands hurt. My throat was dry. I needed water too, but I remembered what my cousin who survived boarding school had warned me. Never argue with a senior, even when you're tired, even when you're sick. They don't see excuses. They only see disrespect. Forcing a smile, I picked up the bucket and held it against my hip. As I hurried out, I heard her voice again, casual and mocking. Make sure it's full, or you'll do it twice. Her friends laughed. I kept walking. The water tank stood at the far end of the school grounds, past the football field where boys were already playing and shouting. The sun beat down hard, and the line at the tank was long. Juniors balanced buckets on thin arms. Some wobbled under the weight. Others whispered complaints, too quiet for seniors to hear. I joined the line, shifting from foot to foot. Sweat stung my eyes. The handle cut into my hand. Every minute felt like an hour. Somewhere behind me, a girl said under her breath, "This is how it is. Welcome back to boarding school." But the words sank deep. When I finally came back to the hostel, my arms shaking from the effort, the bucket almost spilling, I found my senior sitting on my bunk. She had spread her things across my mattress, her hairbrush, a powder case, even a bag of chin-chin snacks. She was humming softly, putting powder on her face, like she owned the bed. "Senior, I brought the water," I said, setting the bucket gently on the floor. She didn't thank me, didn't even look at me. She just waved her fingers. "Leave it there." I looked at my wrinkled blanket, tossed aside like trash. The smell of her body spray, was all over my sheets. That night, when the lights went out and the hostel filled with whispers, snores, and creaking beds, my arms ached, my pride ached more. The weight of the suitcase was nothing compared to the heavier truth pressing on my chest. In this place, being a junior meant carrying loads, getting water, swallowing insults, and learning to disappear. But as I stared up at the ceiling fan, cutting shadows across the room, another thought kept pulling at me, dangerous and stubborn. How long before someone snapped? Because in boarding school, every insult was a seed, and seeds, sooner or later, find a way to grow. By the second day, I learned that boarding school wasn't run by teachers. It wasn't even run by prefects. It was run by rules that weren't written down, but were sharper than any cane. The first rule: greet every senior, always. "Good morning, senior," I said quietly, bowing slightly as I passed a group of SS2 girls near the dining hall. One of them barely looked at me. Her mouth was full of bread. Another one smirked. "Say it louder. Are you greeting yourself?" Heat rushed to my face. "Good morning, seniors." They burst into laughter, happy now, before going back to their chat. I walked away quickly, my cheeks burning, my voice still echoing in my head. The second rule: never eat like you're hungry, even when you are. In the dining hall, spoons clanged against metal plates. Food came in small amounts that barely filled anyone up. Beans with stones, rice with tiny bugs, watery stew. I tried to eat fast, but a sharp tap on my back made me choke. "Slow down, rat," a senior hissed from behind me. "You think you're in your father's house?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to chew slowly, even though my stomach growled. The third rule: punishments are law. Never question them. That evening, a prefect lined up a group of juniors in the courtyard. Their crime? Whispering during study time. Their punishment? Frog jumps across the gravel. "Hands up! Faster!" the prefect shouted, her cane slicing the air. I watched, heart pounding, as girls stumbled, their knees scraping. Amaka shook beside me, her thin arms trembling as she jumped. I tried to help her, but she kept whispering, "Sorry, sorry," like a prayer. Bissy, on the other hand, made her jumps big and dramatic. She even rolled her eyes when the prefect turned away. She whispered, "This punishment can't kill me." I learned then that punishment wasn't about fairness. It was about power. But it wasn't all bad. There were friends to be made. That was when I truly met Amaka and Bissy. Amaka was the quiet, one soft-spoken, with eyes that darted like a trapped bird. She whispered tips for survival. "Don't get water from that tap, seniors use it. Always wash your plate right away, or someone will take it. And don't ever sit on a senior's chair." She survived by being small, by making herself invisible. Bissy was the opposite, sharp-tongued, reckless, fearless. She made fun of seniors behind their backs, hid Gary under her mattress, and once told me, flat out, "They can't kill us. Worst case, they'll flog us, and flogging doesn't kill." I admired her courage, but it scared me too. In a place where silence kept you safe, Bissy was a spark looking for dry wood. Together, the three of us built a fragile friendship, sharing food when dining hall portions weren't enough, whispering secrets under mosquito nets, warning each other when seniors prowled the hostel, looking for prey. But even friendship had its dangers. One afternoon in the dining hall, I learned that rule the hard way. We had just received our food, 2 small lumps of rice with watery stew, and an SS3 girl stood over me. She lifted my plate. "Senior," I stammered, my voice shaking. Her eyebrow went up. "What? Do you have a problem?" Silence hung heavy. Everyone knew the law. If a senior wanted your food, it was theirs, before I could answer. Bissy leaned forward, her voice sharp. "But she hasn't even started eating." Gasps went around the juniors at our bench. Amaka grabbed my arm, eyes wide. The senior smiled coldly and dropped the plate back on the table. "Come and see me in the hostel later." Then she walked away, her laughter ringing in my ears. Amaka hissed, "Are you crazy? Why did you open your mouth?" Thissy only shrugged, stabbing at her rice. "At least they'll know I'm not invisible." My appetite disappeared. I stared at the food, my stomach twisting with fear. That was when I learned another rule. Sometimes silence keeps you safe, but sometimes silence makes you disappear. That night, as we cleaned our lockers, Amaka whispered urgently, "There's one law you must never forget. Seniors never forgive disrespect, even small ones, even by accident." She looked nervously toward a group of SS3 girls passing by. Bissy scoffed. "They'll get tired. They think they're gods. One day, their own time will come." Her words hung in the air, like sparks waiting for dry grass. I didn't know it then, but those sparks, Amaka's fear, Bissy's boldness, and my own silence would shape everything that came next. Because in boarding school, survival wasn't just about following rules. It was about knowing when to break them. And soon enough, the rules of juniors versus seniors would fade, replaced by a bigger war already starting. By the third week, the hostel had split into invisible groups. SS2 girls moved together like a flock of birds, always loud, always laughing too hard. SS3 girls carried themselves like queens, like expecting silence. When they passed, the rivalry wasn't written on paper, but it lived in the walls, in the way hallways went quiet when the two groups crossed paths, in the way even juniors like me held our breath when both classes entered the dining hall at the same time. At first, it seemed harmless, just words, just looks. But in boarding school, small sparks often grow into big fires. The laundry yard incident. It was a hot Sunday afternoon. Buckets clattered and clothes foamed with soap as girls scrubbed in the hostel yard. Lines of uniforms flapped in the hot wind. Towels dripped water onto the sand. I was rinsing my blouse when the fresh shout came. Who removed my clothes? Heads turned. An SS3 girl stood at the line, holding a wet skirt. Her face was angry. "I hung this here this morning. Who touched it?" Across the yard, an SS2 girl raised her chin. "Senior." The line was full. I moved it a little to make space. "Moved? You dropped my uniform on the ground?" The SS3 girl pointed to the wet, sandy patch near her bucket. The SS2 girl folded her arms. "At least it's clean. You can wash it again, right?" Gasps went around the yard. The SS3 girl dropped her bucket with a splash and stormed forward. Buckets toppled. Soapy water soaked the ground. "Say that again." I said, "Wash it again. Wash it again." The sound of the slap cracked across the yard like a whip. The SS2 girl staggered back, her cheek red. Silence followed for one heartbeat. Then another SS2 girl shoved the SS3 girl hard in the prep. Shoulder. "Don't touch her again." Buckets flew. Soap foamed across the sand. Girls screamed and shoved. Juniors scrambled to grab their clothes off the lines, afraid of being caught in the storm. Amaka pulled me behind a tree, her face pale. "You see, this is how it starts." But Bissy stood grinning, arms crossed. "Good. Let them fight." The fight ended only when a prefect stormed in, cane slicing the air, girls scattered, skirts soaked, cheeks burning with anger. But the seed had been planted deeper. The corridor chants not long call after. It spread to the hallways. One evening after study time, SS2 girls gathered in groups, braiding one another's hair and humming songs. At first, it was harmless, but then the humming turned to chanting. "SS3, pack and go. Your time is almost over." Laughter followed, sharp and cutting. The SS3 door flew open. A tall prefect stepped out, her face like stone. "What did you just sing?" The hallway froze. Even mosquitoes seemed to stop buzzing. The SS2 girls looked at each other. One of them, reckless and proud, repeated the line. Louder this time. Gasps. The SS3 prefect's eyes narrowed. "So, you people now have mouths? You think because you're in SS2, you're our equal?" An SS2 girl muttered, "At least we're not failures." The hallway crackled with tension. From that night, silence and respect between SS2 and SS3 became a thing of the past. The rivalry spreads it spilled everywhere. At the water taps, two girls would arrive at once, and suddenly buckets clashed. "You met me here!" Lie! I was standing before you came. Soon voices rose, insults flew, and sometimes even slaps followed. In classrooms, when an SS3 student answered a question wrong, SS2 girls giggled quietly. In the dining hall, SS2 girls clapped spoons to chant victory songs, while SS3 glared across the benches, whispering dark threats. The air grew sharper by the day, even as juniors. We couldn't escape it. SS2 girls pulled us into their songs, while SS3 expected our silence as loyalty. Whichever way we leaned, we were bound to upset someone. The siesta showdown one afternoon during rest time, I woke to be shouting. SS2 and SS3 girls were throwing insults across the hostel hall. Beds rattled as girls stood on them, clapping and cheering like it was a show. You think you're big because you're SS3? Empty heads. At least we'll graduate before you. Useless juniors. The noise rose until a teacher stormed in, cane in hand. Silence fell instantly. But the damage was already done. That night, as I lay on my bunk with the mosquito net hanging over me, I realized the truth we cow. We're all too scared to admit. This wasn't just rivalry anymore. It was war. And war in boarding school always found its battlefield. Theirs would be a football field. You're still with me? Thank you. This story only gets more intense from here. If you're enjoying it, drop a like, hit subscribe, and comment below. Have you ever experienced rivalry like this? Now, let's get back to what happened next. The football field was never just grass and dust. It was a stage, a battleground, and sometimes the only place where pride could be, settled without canes or punishments. That Saturday, the entire school gathered around it. Students lined the edges, prefects sat near the touchline, even a few teachers watched from shaded spots. The game wasn't official, but it mattered more than any exam or sports day. It was SS2 versus SS3, and the hostile rivalry had carried itself neatly onto the field. SS3 will finish them today, someone whispered beside me as the players warmed up. No way. SS2 has been training since last term, another voice said. The noise got louder with each passing minute. Dust rose as boys stamped their boots into the ground. Girls waved handkerchiefs. Chants broke out from both sides. S2. SS2. Victory is ours. SS3. SS3. We own this field. The atmosphere was electric, heavy with excitement. Even the breeze seemed to pause, waiting for the whistle. I stood with Amaka and Bissy, near the edge of the field, pressed into the crowd. Amaka chewed nervously on her nails, her eyes moving between the teams. Let's just hope it ends quickly, she said. If SS3 loses, we're all dead in the hostel. Bissy laughed, shaking her head. And if SS2 wins? Amaka chewed nervously on her nails, her eyes moving between the teams. Let's just hope it ends quickly, she said. If SS3 loses, we're all dead in the hostel. Bissy laughed, shaking her head. And if SS2 wins? I want to see their faces. I want them to feel it. Her grin was sharp and reckless. The whistle blew, the ball rolled, and chaos began. SS3 started strong. Their bigger boys pushed hard, shoulders slamming into opponents. The crowd roared every time a boot hit the ball. Every near miss made people scream with excitement. But SS2 wasn't backing down. They were faster, sharper. Their passes were smooth. Their teamwork was tight. Each time an SS2 player dodged a tackle, the crowd exploded. Minutes passed like hours. Dust covered our faces. Sweat rolled down brows. Voices grew hoarse from chanting. The air was thick with tension. Every kick, every tackle felt like life or death. Then it happened. A quick pass, a sudden break. An SS2 striker ran past two defenders, feet moving like fire. The goalkeeper lunged. Too late. Goal. The field shook with screams. SS2. 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 Girls danced. Boys lifted one another into the air. Sandals flew off feet as juniors spun in wild celebration. The SS3 supporters shouted back, angry, but their voices were drowned by the thunder of SS2 chants. Amaka grabbed my arm, whispering, oh God, it's over. This is trouble. Bissy was already on her feet, clapping and yelling. Finish them. Finish them. The game went on, But the tide had turned. SS3 tried to fight back, pride burning in every kick, but frustration weighed them down. Missed passes, wasted chances, rising tempers. By the final whistle, SS2 had scored again. 2-0. The impossible had happened. The underdogs had beaten the kings. The field exploded into chaos. SS2 supporters flooded the pitch, singing and dancing, lifting their players onto shoulders. The dust rose like smoke around them. Chants rolled like thunder. SS2. SS2. Champions. SS3. You came last. The joy was wild and free, the kind of joy that comes from doing the impossible. But joy is a dangerous thing when it comes at someone else's expense. Across the field, the SS3 boys stood stiff. Their jaws were tight. Sweat shone on their foreheads. Their captain kicked the ball angrily into the crowd. Cursing, the SS3 girls marched onto the field, their faces masks of anger. One of them shouted over the noise, "Is this why you're happy? 2 useless goals?" The SS2 girls only laughed louder, circling them like hyenas. "You came last! You came last! Seniors can't play." The mocking spread like fire. A few juniors, braver in the safety of numbers, joined in the chant. Even Bissy cupped her hands to her mouth, yelling. It was too much. An SS3 girl shoved an SS2 player hard in the chest. "Don't let me hear nonsense from your mouth again." The crowd gasped, a ripple of excitement running through the students. The SS2 boy staggered, then steadied himself, his face lit with anger. Before he could reply, another SS3 girl stepped forward, glaring at the SS2 girls dancing nearby. "You think this is funny? You think you can embarrass us in front of the whole school?" An SS2 girl, tall, daring, reckless, snapped back. "Nobody told you to lose. If you can't play, keep quiet." The field exploded. Screams, shoves, hands flying. Girls from both sides clashing, pulling at hair, slapping faces. A prefect whistle shrieked somewhere in the chaos, but the noise swallowed it whole. Amaka pulled me back, her hands shaking. "We need to go now." But Bissy stood rooted, her eyes wide, almost thrilled. "Look at this fight," she said, half laughing. I pulled her away before she could get caught in the storm. From the edge of the crowd, I watched as prefects and teachers finally pushed through, canes slicing the air, voices booming. The students scattered, some nursing bruises, others still throwing insults as they ran. The match had ended with a score, yes, but in truth, there were no winners, only wounds. As we walked back to the hostel, the tension clung like sweat. The SS2 girls sang under their breath, their voices sharp with pride. The SS3 girls walked in silence, but their eyes promised revenge. That night, the celebration didn't die. It grew louder. Buckets banged like drums. Songs filled the hostile. Laughter pierced the air, but beneath it all, I could feel it, the storm that hadn't broken yet. The football field had only been the spark. The real fire was waiting for us back in the hostel, and when it came, no chant would save us. The hostel banter turns bloody. The hostel that night was no place for sleep. Buckets banged like drums. Sandals slapped against the floor in rhythm. SS2 girls sang their victory songs with a pride that filled every corner. SS2 forever. SS3 never. Senior who can't play, you came last. The chants were loud enough to wake the entire compound. But the SS2 girls didn't care. They wanted their voices to reach the SS3 hostel upstairs. To sting, to mock, to remind them of their loss. At first, the SS3 girls ignored it. They moved through the hallways like shadows, their faces blank, their silence heavy. But silence in boarding school was never peace. It was the kind of silence that sharpened like a blade, and soon the blade cut. The spark came when a group of SS2 girls burst into the common room, dancing and clapping, making fun of the SS3 prefects by copying their walk. Laughter shook the walls. One SS3 girl stood up from her seat, her voice low and dangerous. You think you can mock us? The SS2 girls only laughed harder. One of them clapped in her face. Go and play football again. Maybe you will learn how to run. Gasps echoed through the room. The SS3 girl's hand moved faster than thought. Slap! The sound cracked like thunder, silencing the laughter. For a second, everything froze. Then all hell broke loose. Beds scraped across the floor as girls jumped up. Buckets toppled. Water splashed across the cement. Screams filled the room. You can't slap her! Touch me again if you dare! Who do you think you are? Hands flew slaps, punches, hair pulling. Some girls used belts. Others grabbed sandals, swinging wildly. Juniors scrambled under beds, squealing. Their mosquito. Nets were ripped down in the chaos. I was trapped in the middle. My heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. Amaka clung to my arm, her eyes wide with terror. Let's hide, she shouted. But BCO... Bissy was in the thick of it, shoving and shouting like she had been waiting for this night all term. The fight raged across the room, spilling into the hallway. Wooden lockers rattled, glass water bottles smashed. Girls fell over one another in a blur of fists and screams. Then, it happened. One girl nobody ever agreed on who pushed first stumbled against the metal edge of a locker. There was a sickening crack. She fell. Blood spilled across the floor. The fighting stopped instantly. Silence crashed over the hostel, heavier than any noise. The injured girl groaned, her hands clutching her head, red spreading between her fingers for AA. Moment. Everyone just stared SS2, SS3, juniors alike realizing what had just happened. The songs, the chants, the jokes, all of it had led to this. Then the screaming began again, but this time, it wasn't for pride. Somebody call a teacher. She's bleeding. Jesus Christ. She will die. Feet pounded the floor as girls ran in all directions. Amaka was sobbing into my shoulder, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Bissy stood frozen, her grin gone, her fists hanging useless at her sides. And me? I couldn't move. I just stared at the blood spreading across the cement, my stomach twisting, my throat dry. When the teachers finally stormed in, canes in hand, the hostel looked like a war zone. Beds overturned, buckets scattered, girls with torn uniforms and swollen faces. The injured student was rushed out, her groans echoing down the hallway. The rest of us stood in terrified silence as the principal himself entered, his face like thunder. I warned you people, his voice boomed, shaking the walls. I warned you. But since you will not listen, he pointed at us, his eyes burning. Every single girl involved will leave this school. Expelled. Gasps went around the hostel. Someone fainted. Just like that, the songs of victory turned into the cries of defeat. That night, as I lay in the darkness, the chants still ringing in my ears, I realized something. Boarding school wasn't just about rivalry. It wasn't just about pride. It was about how quickly laughter could turn into blood, and how one night could change everything. Morning came, but it did not feel like morning. Hostel was silent, eerily so. No clatter of buckets, no chatter about missing socks, no laughter under mosquito nets, just silence, broken only by the shuffle of feet and the occasional cough. The fight had drained us. The blood on the cement had been scrubbed away, but the memory of it lingered, staining the air heavier than any smell. Amaka sat on her bunk, her eyes swollen from crying all night. Bissy stared out the window, jaw clenched, fists tight, her boldness. Shaken, but not gone. Me? I sat on the edge of my bed, my suitcase by my side. Though I hadn't packed, the whole hostel had been ordered to report to the assembly ground. That could only mean one thing: judgment. The assembly ground buzzed with whispers as the entire school gathered. Students craned their necks to catch sight of the accused. SS2 and SS3 girls stood in a long line, faces pale, uniforms wrinkled, pride stripped away. We juniors, me, Amaka, and Bissy stood among them, though we hadn't thrown fists, hadn't even been players in their rivalry. We had only been swept up in the noise, the songs, the chants that lit the fire. But in boarding school, guilt wasn't individual, it was collective. If you were there, if your voice was heard, if your body was part of the crowd, you were guilty. The principal walked slowly to the microphone. His face was like stone, his eyes hard. Behind him stood teachers, prefects, and the matron, arms folded, faces grim. "I warned you," the principal began, his voice calm but filled with held-back anger. "This school is a place for learning, for discipline, for shaping the future." Yet, what did I hear? That my students turned this hostel into a battlefield? That you shamed this institution in front of everyone? Whispers went around the crowd. Some juniors sniffled. Others simply bowed their heads. The principal's hand slammed on the podium. Bang. Do you not understand? A student could have died last night. The silence was deafening. One by one, teachers stepped forward, calling out names. Girls shook as they were called, stepping out from the line. Some tried to explain, but prefects silenced them with sharp shouts. Silence. Amaka's name was called. She burst into tears, grabbing my sleeve before stumbling forward. She hadn't fought, hadn't mocked, hadn't even wanted to watch, but she was guilty because she was present. Bissy's name followed. She lifted her chin, bold to the last, but her eyes showed the fear beneath. Her loud voice during the chants had sealed her fate. And then, my name. My heart sank as whispers rose around me. I had only been there, only watching, yet that was enough. Being present was a crime. Silence was a crime. The principal's voice cut through it all. Every girl involved in last night's disgraceful fight is hereby expelled from this school, with immediate effect. The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples of shock across the assembly ground. Gasps, cries, and protests rose from the crowd. Some begged, fainted. Others simply stared, too numb to react. I felt my knees wobble, the world spinning. Expelled? Just like that? All for chance, for pride, for a match that should never have mattered? We were herded to the side, like criminals waiting for judgment. Some parents were already being called. Some students were whispering rumors. I saw the SS3 prefects smirking faintly, their pride restored not by the game, but by our downfall. I saw juniors staring at us with wide, fearful eyes, as though we were warning stories made flesh. And I saw the teachers shake their heads, their disappointment like another punishment. When it was over, when the principal walked away and the crowd began to scatter, I stood rooted to the spot. We were juniors, not SS2 or SS3. We weren't the ones with pride to defend. But it didn't matter. Boarding school had no room for innocence when collective shame was at stake. As we were marched back to the hostel to pack, I realized something heavier than the suitcase by my bed. In a world ruled by pride and power, even the innocent bleed. The suitcase felt heavier on the way out than it had when I first dragged it into the hostel. Maybe it was because this time it wasn't just filled with clothes and food. It carried shame, disappointment, and the weight of dreams cut short. I watched the school gates get smaller behind me, the red brick walls glowing in the afternoon sun. Students gathered at the windows, peeking out, whispering as we left. To them, we weren't classmates anymore. We were stories, warnings, examples. At home, silence filled the air. My mother's eyes filled with questions I couldn't answer. She looked at me, like I had broken something she worked years to build. Expelled? She whispered, her voice shaking. For fighting? I didn't fight, I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. Because, in truth, it didn't matter. To the school, to the principal, to everyone else I was guilty, simply because I was there. And sometimes, being there is all it takes. Days turned into weeks, and still, the memory clung to me. The chants, The dust of the football field, the crack of the slap, the blood on the hostel floor. I replayed it in my mind, wondering if I could have done something different. Stayed silent longer. Walked away sooner. Dragged Bissy out before her mouth pushed us all deeper into trouble. But regret was useless. The decision was final. Amaka wrote me a letter once. Her handwriting was shaky. The ink was smudged with tears. I still wake up thinking we're in the hostel. I hear the songs in my sleep. Sometimes I wonder if we were cursed from the start, but at least we were together. Bissy's letter was different. Shh. Bull. They can throw us out, but they can't silence us. One day, people will know what really happened. Reading their words, I realized the fight hadn't just taken our place in school. It had marked us. It had carved scars on our futures, in ways we couldn't yet see. And me? I don't know if I will ever return to boarding school. I don't know if I will ever carry a suitcase through those gates again. But I do know this. Boarding school wasn't just about learning math or English. It was about learning power, how it moves, how it crushes, how it punishes without mercy. And if life is another kind of boarding school, then maybe I am already prepared. Because once you've seen laughter turn to blood, once you've been punished for simply existing, you learn the hardest truth of all. Survival is never about fairness. It's about endurance. And I am still here. Sometimes I wonder about Amaka, if she ever found peace, or if her tears still follow her into her sleep. Sometimes I wonder about Bissy, if her fire still burns, or if life forced her to dim it. And sometimes, late at night, I imagine the three of us together again, older, freer, telling our story not with shame, but with pride. Because maybe this wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was just the first chapter of something bigger. That's my story. If it resonated with you, if you've survived your own boarding school, or any place where power ruled over fairness, leave a comment. I want to hear your story too. Subscribe for more true stories like this, and remember, survival is never about fairness. It's about endurance. Thank you for listening. End.